What if I told you the biggest disruption to the Asian music industry isn't coming from Korea, isn't coming from Japan, and definitely isn't coming from the West, but from 5 Filipino men who chose to rewrite the rules? SB19 didn't just debut as another idol group, they built a structure that challenges the traditional systems built on control, hierarchy, and rigid management culture. While many Asian labels prioritize tight oversight and long-term artist dependency, SB19 developed a model that makes them harder to control and even harder to stop. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If their independent, efficiency-driven strategy proves sustainable long-term, it could expose how outdated and restrictive many traditional Asian idol systems truly are, forcing executives to reconsider power structures, artist autonomy, profit distribution, and the future blueprint of regional pop dominance. Today, we're breaking down the strategy most labels are hesitant to attempt and why SB19 may have already proven it works in real time. Like, share, and subscribe, and make sure you stay until the end because the final section addresses the part few insiders are willing to openly discuss. Let's begin with the uncomfortable foundation. Most Asian idol industries, whether in South Korea, Japan, or China, are structured around one central principle: control. Control over image, output, scheduling, branding, messaging, and often even personal expression. This system prioritizes hierarchy, long contracts, centralized decision-making, and tightly managed public personas designed to minimize risk and maximize predictability across highly competitive domestic and regional entertainment markets. Control extends over image, music, schedules, revenue streams, public narrative, and even personal expression. The system typically works like this. Trainees enter at a young age, companies invest heavily in development, and artists debut under long-term contracts where the label owns the master recordings, dictates creative direction, and takes the largest financial share. From a business standpoint, that structure minimizes corporate risk because the company retains decision-making power while the artist functions as the managed product. For years, this model dominated much of Asia's pop landscape. Look at the rise of K-pop under major agencies like SM Entertainment, YG Entertainment, and JYP Entertainment. It scaled massively, industrialized idol production, optimized global export strategy, and generated billions in revenue through centralized control, standardized training systems, and tightly protected intellectual property structures. But here's the structural flaw. That traditional idol system depends on artist replaceability. If one member exits, another trainee steps in and the machine keeps running with minimal disruption. SB19 didn't build a replaceable machine, they built leverage, and leverage changes everything. When they debuted under Show BT Philippines, they trained within a Korean-style development system built on discipline, hierarchy, and rigorous structure. They experienced the grind firsthand. But here's where the trajectory shifted. Instead of remaining permanently confined within that framework, they later formed 1Z Entertainment, not as a vanity project or cosmetic rebrand, but as a calculated pivot toward ownership, autonomy, and strategic control. That move signaled independence over dependency, equity over allowance, and governance over compliance. And that is precisely the point where traditional labels begin to feel uncomfortable pressure building behind the scenes. Because when artists control their music, direct their brand identity, and own real decision-making power, they stop functioning as label-managed assets and start operating as independent businesses. SB19 chose that path of independence, and that's the gamble many traditional companies don't want their artists even considering. Most Asian label systems are engineered around dependency, not autonomy. Now let's talk about control versus capital. Traditional Asian entertainment agencies typically run on capital-heavy infrastructures, massive trainee investments, high production budgets, international marketing campaigns, physical distribution networks, layered management teams, and complex promotional pipelines. It's an expensive ecosystem, and because the financial exposure is high, companies tighten control to protect their investment. But SB19 flipped that formula. Instead of scaling control to justify capital, they scaled efficiency to reduce capital dependence, prioritizing ownership, lean operations, digital-first distribution, agile marketing strategies, and fan-driven growth that lowers overhead while preserving leverage, flexibility, and long-term equity accumulation.
SB19 built a digitally native fan base anchored in direct-to-fan engagement, lean operations, and diversified revenue streams that don't rely solely on traditional label pipelines. Instead of scaling through expensive infrastructure, they scaled through loyalty. Instead of constructing bigger buildings, they cultivated stronger fans, and loyalty scales far cheaper than control ever could. If more Asian artists recognize they can build fandom first, identity second, and ownership third, the balance of power inevitably shifts, and when power shifts, industries grow uneasy. So why won't most labels adopt this model? Because it threatens three core pillars. First, profit structure. Greater artist ownership means higher revenue shares for talent, reduced centralized control, and slimmer margins for companies. Second, narrative authority. In traditional systems, the company shapes the story, but in SB19's case, the artists shape their own trajectory, altering the psychological contract between brand and audience. Third, precedent. Because once one group proves autonomy works sustainably, others may demand similar equity, transparency, governance rights, and structural reform across the regional entertainment ecosystem. The biggest disruption is this: if SB19 proves that artist-led management works, that independent strategy can scale, and that Asian acts can compete globally without surrendering ownership, then other artists will start asking hard questions, and companies rarely welcome that. Now consider the global play. SB19 didn't reject Asia, they strengthened their regional foundation first. Instead of immediately chasing Western validation, they solidified credibility at home, building influence across regional markets before expanding outward. That's strategic patience. When domestic proof is strong, global expansion becomes leverage, not desperation. It contrasts sharply with the traditional spend millions upfront and hope global traction follows model. SB19 built validation first, then scaled internationally. That isn't emotional growth, it's disciplined sequencing. But let's be fair, the strategy carries risk. Without a major label backing them, there's no guaranteed global playlist placement, no massive upfront capital injection, and no institutional safety net. If decisions fail, they absorb the consequences directly, financially, operationally, reputationally, making every move calculated, deliberate, data-informed, and strategically aligned with long-term sustainability goals. Here's the irony. Because SB19 owns the risk, they also own the upside, and that's what unsettles traditional labels most. It's not failure they fear, but success that happens without them. Now imagine the domino effect. If more Asian artists begin demanding ownership, equity, and genuine creative control, contract structures would inevitably shift, revenue splits would be renegotiated, long trainee agreements would face scrutiny, and transparency would become a standard expectation rather than a rare concession. That's more than a business adjustment, it's an ecosystem-level disruption, and ecosystems instinctively resist disruption to preserve hierarchy and control. SB19 isn't just building a career, they may be constructing a replicable blueprint, and blueprints tend to spread once proven viable. There's also a psychological layer many overlook. When artists control their narrative and strategic direction, fans place a different kind of trust in them. Deeper, more resilient, more invested, because authenticity feels aligned with autonomy, and that alignment strengthens loyalty, advocacy, long-term engagement, and community-driven amplification. The bond deepens because the success feels authentic, earned, and self-directed rather than manufactured behind closed doors. That psychological alignment drives higher engagement, stronger loyalty, and better retention, key ingredients for long-term sustainability. In today's digital era, longevity consistently outperforms short-term hype cycles. This is why the old guard feels uneasy. Traditional systems rely on hierarchy, secrecy, exclusivity, and gatekeeping to preserve centralized authority. SB19, however, leans toward transparency, community building, direct communication, and visible artist empowerment. Those two philosophies rarely coexist peacefully, because one concentrates power at the top, while the other distributes it across artists and fans, and distributed power is far more difficult to contain, predict, or restrict. Which leads to the bigger question: is SB19 simply an exception to the rule, or are they signaling the early stages of a structural shift that could permanently redefine how Asian pop ecosystems function in the modern global marketplace? Or are they a preview of what's next? Because if this model truly scales, Asia could see more artist-owned labels, more hybrid management structures, greater revenue transparency, fewer replaceable idols, and more irreplaceable brands, fundamentally reshaping how the regional pop industry operates. Most revolutions don't initially look like revolutions. They look like risks, arrogance, or overambition. Sometimes they simply look like 5 artists betting on themselves. SB19's strategy isn't just bold, it's inconvenient. Inconvenient for an industry built on centralized control. Inconvenient for systems designed around replaceability. Inconvenient for labels that never anticipated artists demanding ownership, equity, and structural influence. And that discomfort is precisely why many traditional Asian companies hesitate to experiment with this path, fearing precedent, profit compression, authority dilution, contractual renegotiations, and long-term redistribution of power across the entertainment ecosystem. Because if this strategy works long-term, it doesn't just shape one group's future, it shifts the entire Asian pop structure. Once artists recognize they can build leverage instead of dependency, there's no turning back. So the real question isn't whether SB19 will succeed. The real question is how the entire Asian pop industry will respond if they do. This could trigger new business models, altered revenue splits, renegotiated contracts, and fan-driven influence reshaping traditional hierarchies. If you want more in-depth breakdowns like this, not just fan hype, but precise strategy analysis, subscribe, because the next major shift in Asian pop might already be happening, and you're witnessing it in real time.